And you're very welcome to the More Than a Game podcast in association with the LGFA. It is me, Michelle Ryan, here, and it's hard to believe it's been 2 months since my last chat with our first guest, Christina McGinty. But I'm delighted to say I have another guest here with me, a Kildare lady with many strings to her bow. Not only does she play ladies football with her club Kilcock, but also with Parnells of London, as well as being a primary school teacher. She's also an accredited sports psychologist. So I'm delighted to welcome Bernie Durkan to the podcast today. Thanks for joining me, Bernie.
No bother at all, Michelle. Thanks for having me on.
So look, I suppose really I'm going to start straight away with the whole sports psychology. And the reason I'm jumping straight in there is because that was always something that massively appealed to me as a player and still does. And I know that was where you initially went when it came to, I suppose, your third level courses into sports science in DCU. And what kind of led you into that avenue?
So I suppose I did my 4 years in DCU, and I probably would have been very young coming out. So I just turned 17 doing my leaving cert, had sports science down, got the course, didn't really know what it was about. Always thought I maybe wanted to do physio. And actually when I went through the sports science, hated biomechanics, hated all of that. And sports psychology was something that really interested me. And probably from the start, it was more the motor skills side of things rather than, the mental performance side of things. But after I finished there, I went to Liverpool John Moores University and did my master's in sports psychology. So that's quite a long time ago now. And kind of reflecting back now, what I would say is I really think as a sports psychologist, you need to have a bit of life experience behind you to go and do that course, because I think I would have appreciated it more now rather than as a 22-year-old with very little life experience behind me. And I'm somebody who always wants to learn. I always want to do courses. I'm always trying to figure out, what's the next thing I can do. And when I moved back home from London, I was away for a few years. I went back to Dún Laoghaire and did a certificate in sports psychology because I wanted to find out what was the most up-to-date thing, because I'd finished mine in 2008, which is, quite a long time ago. But I always would have been conscious of it. And probably like the one module in my sports psychology master's that stood out to me was simply called listening skills. And that is something that is so important. And I think as a primary school teacher as well, it's kind of reflected in society today. People find it really, really hard to listen to each other. And especially in terms of a coach and player relationship, you have to be able to listen to each other. And I think people have a tendency to, want to give advice and want to find a solution straight away, whereas people just want to be listened to. And when I go in and work with teams, it's generally on, communication and the way you talk to yourself and the way as a coach or as a player you talk to your teammates or the team that you're coaching. So, a lot of the time when I go in to work with players, I actually end up working with the coaching team just on, how they're communicating and things like that. So it is really interesting and so multifaceted. There's not just, one approach fits all. It's psychology at the end of the day, and everybody is different and everybody, takes a different approach to their performance. So there's just so many sides to it, Michelle.
And I suppose, look, one thing you said there that's really, really interesting is, I suppose, taking this on as a 22-year-old and now maybe with a little bit more experience that you can actually maybe see a little bit more. And I always find as well with sports psychologists, especially when you're coming from a player background, when you think of the likes of, I think way back to the likes of Enda McNulty, you've Kevin McManaman now, obviously Caroline Curd as well, who played ladies football with Sligo. When you're entering into that field, already having had that player mentality, you're not just an observer in the dressing room, you're actually somebody who has sat there. You know the feelings that are involved, the mental turmoil that it can be to get to match day and so on, and all the different things that go through your head. To my mind, that I suppose lends a lot more credence to somebody as a sports psychologist when they've not just read about that, but they've been in that situation as well.
Yeah, and like a lot of it comes back to kind of counselling skills, having empathy, being able to empathize with somebody, and people take that on board, and as well not being judgmental. So letting somebody tell their story, saying back to them, this is what you've told me, have I interpreted it correctly? Because very often, I always say to people I work with, you need to have face-to-face conversations, because over text message or WhatsApp things can get lost in translation. So it's really, really important that you know, both sides of the conversation check in to, you know, to say to people, this is what you've said to me, and this is the meaning I'm taking from it. And like you said, Michelle, you know, having that experience as a player, you can totally relate to, you know, the different situations that players are going to be in. And especially in terms of ladies football, I think, you know, there are very few people out there, you know, working as accredited sports psychologists who have that experience. And, you know, I've tried, you know, there was one year where I was like, right, I'm just not going to work with football teams because I know too much about it. I know too many people, too many connections. I'm going to go and work in other sports. And I didn't have enough experience in those sports to empathize with it. And I find it really difficult as a practitioner, you know, working with rugby players or whatever, to, you know, to empathize with them and see their point of view, because I didn't know enough about the game. So in terms of being a practitioner, you have to go and do your research on, you know, the rules and, you know, the behavior and what's acceptable and what's not. So it's a lot easier when you're immersed in a sport to work in that sport, I find. Anyway, that's been my experience.
And did you take things from those other sports, I suppose, into now, I suppose, the GA scene and that, or have you seen that for a lot of the different sports, no matter whether it's GA, ladies football, men's football, hurling, or rugby, or whatever it is, that everybody goes through the kind of same doubts, everyone goes through the same mental process and has to build themselves up in the same way?
Oh, 100%. And I think there's, you know, in the age of Instagram or whatever, there's so much kind of, you know, positive psychology out there, and, you know, everybody throws, you know, control the controllables around, but you know, they've seen it on a graphic on Instagram, but they don't ever actually think, you know, this is how it applies to me. And I think there's so many kind of, you know, influencers out there who don't have any qualifications, and they're trying to, you know, tell you this is how, you know, life should be in a 20-second snapshot on Instagram, and that's not reality. But when you do take a step back, and it's irrelevant of the sport, you know, every athlete that I work with, it generally what it comes down to is self-talk, the way that they talk to themselves, communicating openly with people, and being brave enough, you know, to go and have those conversations if there's something that they're struggling with. And sometimes I think there's kind of a negative connotation associated with sports psychology. People think a sports psychologist is somebody you go to if there's something wrong. And, you know, very often people think that I'm a counsellor. Like, I'm not a counsellor, but I know when to refer, you know, people on if I can't deal with it. And, you know, generally when I go into work with teams, it's like, oh, there's a problem, go talk to Bernie. Whereas I think it should be approached from the same point of view as, you know, strength conditioning and nutrition. You're always trying to find that extra percentage that you can work on. And like, I'm not going to be naive and you know, sit here and be like, you know, the mental side of things, people say is, you know, 90% of it. No, it's not. Like, if you don't have, you know, the aerobic capacity, if you don't work on your skills, you're not going to be performing at an elite level. So you need to be realistic as well. And like, if I was to be realistic and throw out a percentage, I'd probably say it's 20% of it. But, you know, how much time, people go on and on about how much the mental side of performance is so important. But as an athlete and as a coach, how much time do you spend on the mental side of things? So when you take a step back and think about that, very often the answer is, you know, we don't do any prep here, or we don't think about it. We're all, you know, we're all talk, but no action. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think as well, when you go into work with teams, and I know you have worked with teams, and am I right in saying you were with the Armagh in 2021 as well? Yeah. So like, and other teams obviously aside of that, and can it be difficult to go in? And I suppose the thing about the sports psychologist, it's kind of like the physio as well. You're on that line between the management and the players, because you have the trust of both and you're hearing from all sides. And I suppose balancing that while maintaining good relationships with either side, and maybe telling people on both sides things that they don't want to hear or maybe mightn't agree with.
Yeah, and like that happens a lot. You know, if you're working with players, you know, they are going to vent. And what I find works best is, like you said, creating that relationship of trust and respect, and, you know, knowing the boundaries. But it's very, very important to have that relationship with both sides. And, you know, when you're working with players and you're trying to get them to open up those communication channels, also going and speaking with the coach and saying to them, you know, I've noticed at training that you do this, because coaches have to be open to, you know, receiving feedback as well. And what I find is a lot of people don't. But I'm very lucky in my current position and the team that I'm working with, that, you know, that is, like, I'm massively respected and I will be asked my opinion. Whereas I've worked with teams in the past where, you know, you're just there to tick a box. And it's very, very important you know, players will come to you if they feel, you know, what I do is something that might help them, which is great. And I would never approach someone and say, you need to do this. You know, it has to come from the player. If they're not willing to do it, it's not going to work. But it's really, really important that coaches are willing to learn too. And as a coach, you know, it's like teaching. I just think there's a lot of transfer between coaching and being a teacher and education. You have to be, you know, open to developing and learning and growing with the player and figuring out different ways to build rapport with players so that they can be challenged but supported at the same time as that.
And there's always a mix. And I would have found, I suppose, my own playing days, like I said, I was very much into this, and I can still remember some of the stories that sports psychologists told me over the years about, like, I suppose, positive thinking and the power of the mind, and whether they were true or not, they landed with me anyway. But there was always, I suppose, there's always different cohorts. And I heard Jim McGuinness in a recent podcast with Tomas O'Shea. So there's different cohorts of players, and who are you aiming at? And, you know, there would have been some who really buy into this stuff, and then there's some who really don't and just want to go out and play and don't want to get into too much depth, and maybe that's what works for them. So it must be kind of, I suppose, tricky to hit everybody and bring everybody along. Not everybody maybe along to the same degree, but bring them along anyway.
Yeah, and like, I think, you know, a lot of people contact me and they're like, I just want you to come in and, you know, give a talk to the team. And like, I am not a motivational speaker. Like Michelle, I would not motivate you to get up off that chair. Like, that's not how I work. Like, and what I think is important is just educating, you know, giving people the information, being like, this is what it's about. And like, I just keep it really simple. Sports psychology is developing skills you already have. Skills that you use every day, but maybe you're not using them, you know, to their maximum potential. And like I said at the start, a lot of it comes back to self-talk and the way that you talk to yourself. And, you know, if you're constantly telling yourself you can't do something, of course you're not going to be able, you know, to do it. If it's just changing your language. And as a player and as a coach, I think that should be a number one priority. Same thing with that is, I think if you give, you know, there is a benefit to doing group sessions where you give out information and you let players go away and think about it. And then how I work is I let them come and talk to me. I think it's important as well to kind of have a presence at training. So I wouldn't be at training all the time. It might be like once a fortnight, once a month, and just going and having the chat and building up that rapport so that they start to get comfortable with, you know, talking to me. And you know, sometimes you might have conversations just by saying hello, and like, my nature is I will talk to the wall, and I'll always, you know, go over and have a chat and, you know, find out about people. And, you know, I find that when I go to Armagh, they have their own pitch now, and it's just such a welcoming place. But like, when I go up there, I'm not just talking to players, I'm talking to the people who help out the pitch and help them with, you know, parents who might be there dropping off, you know, underage players or whatever. And it's really, really important that you create an environment where players and coaches, you know, feel trusted and feel like they can come to you and know that what they're going to say to you is for me to try and help you, but to know that, you know, that everything they say to me is in trust and in confidence.
I suppose going back then to your time as a player and even what got you to this and the understanding of all of this regards to playing, your home club is Kilcock. And I suppose, you mentioned about not being a counsellor or sometimes being a counsellor, but did you naturally fill that role in your club team anyway? And did you kind of bring that into you playing, or was that just a totally separate element to your life when you were younger playing in the club?
I suppose a small bit. Like, when I didn't start playing football until I was 17. So I think I was 5th year in school before there was, you know, any sort of football in Kilcock, and I started playing minor. And
what got you playing then, Bernie, at 17? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think they just set up a team in Kilcock, and like, my first sport back then was athletics, and somebody just came to me in school. I would have played a bit of camogie in school, but just in school, because there wasn't a club in Kilcock. But I essentially used to just kick the ball along the ground and run along with it. But went and played. And my mom and dad are both from Mayo. I was listening to Christina last night, and I was like, my story is pretty similar here. So they're both obsessed with Mayo football. So we always would have been brought to matches, and I always would have kicked around with my dad, I suppose. But there just was no club in Kilcock, and started then. And when I went to DCU, would have played football. So, you know, it's funny when you look at college players now, they've more than likely been playing since they were 4. And so by the time they get to 18, they've been playing for 14 years. I went to college and I've been playing for 2. And like I say that I coach an under 17 team now, and I say that to them the whole time. Like when I was your age, I'd only started. You know, don't be panicking about the small things. And I think because I still play with my club, it's a lot easier, I think, to do my sports psychology as a coach and as a player on the sideline, because it's a lot easier to say to somebody, oh, what do you think about that? Or, you know, have you tried this? Or, you know, even just picking up on, you know, I was at training last night and one of the girls like, I just can't do it. I can't do it. And just, you know, having that 2 or 3 minutes to have a conversation with her, just to say to her, listen to the way that you're talking to yourself, just, you know, catch it and realize, right, I need to change this, what I'm saying to myself, and move on. But I think because I'm one of the oldest players on my team now, you're always going to kind of take that, you know, role. I suppose people will always come to you and be like, what do you think about this? Or and actually what I found myself doing this year, because when I'm on the pitch, I'm a defender, but I feel like I coach while I play. So I've had to reel it in and stop coaching, because those players need to develop their own skills. And, you know, I'm late 30s now, I'm not going to be playing, you know, on the first team essentially for too much longer, and they need to be able to make their own decisions, because they'll say that to me. They'll say, oh, when you're there, we just know, you know, what to do because you'll tell us. Whereas I've thought about it a lot this year and realized I need to stop doing that so that they can make decisions for themselves.
And like, it sounds like you're kind of seamlessly making that, I suppose, slow transition. I'm not retiring you, just yet, don't worry. Into the coaching side of things. And I know you were involved in the ladies football Learn to Lead, and the coaching strands graduated this year. So, and obviously your psychology is the reflective coach. So it really is an area you probably see yourself, you know, keeping in touch with ladies football and bringing your professional and your personal passion as well.
Yeah, and I think between, you know, having my sports psychology, being a teacher, and, you know, and coaching, they all interlink really, really well together. And like, so you'd be coaching in school, and I work in Kilcock, in a school in Kilcock, and it's an urban school, and we've lots of different nationalities, and it's so lovely to, you know, coach children from all over the world in you know, the skills of Gaelic football, and they love it. And the reason they love it, and what I try to hammer home to them, is these skills are transferable to all different sports. So even though, you know, we might be focusing on Gaelic football for this 4 weeks, these skills are transferable. And again, with coaching, it's just so nice to be, you know, involved with your local community and to give back. And what's so lovely now is, you know, girls, I've coached the minor team in Kilcock for the last 6 or 7 years, but they're playing senior football with me now. So it's so nice to see them, you know, make that transition up. And just what I find is so important is, especially during the teenage years, is, you know, keeping those girls on board. And it's not, success for me is not winning trophies. Success for me is continued participation and getting girls to keep coming back football and creating, you know, that network of friends. And it's probably similar for you too, Michelle. Like, all my best friends are from playing football, and anytime I've moved away, my number one has been, where's the nearest football team? I need to go and make a connection here, and, you know, find like-minded people. And coaching, I think, like I said before, is an opportunity to give back, and you just I get so much enjoyment from it. And it's just, again, like I said, the connections that you make, and just seeing them progress and develop, and, you know, grow in confidence and develop their skills. It's brilliant, and it's really rewarding. And I suppose with the Learn to Lead program, like, the most powerful part of that for me was meeting other like-minded women from all over the country, and just being able to share ideas and listen to their stories, which were, you know, so powerful. And people talk a lot about resilience. It's the buzzword in sports psychology at the minute. And what the research from resilience has shown is that, you know, in order to be the best at your highest level, you need to come through some sort of adversity. And the stories, you know, that were shared were so powerful, and just makes you appreciate, you never know what's going on in somebody else's life, but ladies football can be such an outlet for somebody. And I always talk about, you know, the person before the player. And when you go training, you know, there might be 10 6-year-olds doing cartwheels in the corner, but if they're happy, you know, that's what it's about. And like, it's so important, I think, to give teenage girls, you know, that 10 minutes to chat before training, because they need it, and they, you know, they need their phone break, and, you know, break to tie up their hair. And you just have to have a bit of patience, and, you know, because you're making friends, and at the end of the day, that's what you need.
Yeah, and you want them to come back, you know, and you're dead right. Like you need that little bit of atmosphere there, and then the serious kick in, and then let it go back to that then again. But
Yeah.
you touched on something there, and I'm glad actually to hear. You know, it sounds like you had a very similar experience to what we would have had in the Learn to Lead, because it for us, I would have always felt it was never going to be beneficial unless we did share and we were willing to, I suppose, connect in that way, because you know, you can only be, I suppose, the sense of bravado that you've got everything together, and you know what's going on, and you're in control of everything, and you know you need to let that go and realize, you know, no, I don't, and it's okay that I don't, and they don't either, and you know, and you kind of come together and you learn so much from each other, and it sounds like you had a very similar experience.
Yeah, it was brilliant, and I would recommend it to anyone. Just the, you know, the friendships that you make. And I felt, even though we had our graduation there 2 weeks ago, it felt like our journey is only starting. Because of COVID, we'd got together a minimal amount of time, so it felt like we were only getting to know each other, and then then it was over. But it's brilliant that we have, you know, we're going to have mentor sessions now for the next while, which is brilliant, so we can connect again, and like we have WhatsApp groups, and we stay in contact. And it was such a worthwhile program, not just, you know, as a coach, but just for like everyone's personal development, and just, you know, being able to kind of put yourself outside of your comfort zone and challenge yourself a little bit. And I just feel like everyone came away feeling that they'd grown as a person, and, you know, and had learned something from their experience. So it's brilliant. I just recommend it to everyone. It's so good.
And actually, you touched on the next thing I was going to ask you about there a few minutes ago. You touched about you know, moving away and looking for a GA club, and that is something that you did. And one of my questions was going to be, did you automatically know that you were going to go looking for a GA club when you moved to London? But obviously the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, and I, like, the reason I moved to London was, like, I was prime recession 2008. There was no jobs. I was not going to get a permanent job in sports science or sports psychology, so I decided to do primary school teaching. So I went to St. Mary's in Twickenham and played football there. There's a great tradition there of, you know, playing football with the university. And I suppose my first thing was, I don't know if you know about London football, Michelle, but at the time I was there was two massive clubs. So Parnell's was one and Father Murphy's was the other.
And the funny thing is, actually, Bernie, to cut across it, is I would always have known of Parnell's because I always remember the seven-a-side competition that used to be on in Dublin before the Ladies All Ireland. Our club would have participated in an awful lot, and they were often there. And I think they won a few of the cups at some stage, or the shields at some stage. I remember London winning the Junior All Ireland as well. Was it 2007? I think it was, or 2008. Sorry, they lost in 2007. 2008. So I would have been very aware of Parnell's, actually, and would have always have, supposed, traditionally been a strong club in London.
And the funny thing was, when I went to London, you know, Father Murphy's is based in Twickenham, so traditionally St. Mary's players would have went to play there. But I was fortunate enough to play football with Hannah Noonan. I don't know if you know Hannah.
I've heard she did an interview recently, actually. I think she did an recently. She's still playing.
So she's still playing, So Hannah roped me in, and we just got really, really friendly. And she was like, if you don't play for Parnell's, I'll never talk to you again. So that's how I got roped into playing for Parnell's, and it was just brilliant. We had, like, I think I joined with them, it was 2012, the year we won the Intermediate Club All Ireland, and then until I moved home in 2015. But it's just a brilliant opportunity to have. And then you have the likes of Hannah, who's, you know, English born or whatever, and she has a cycle of friends every couple of years, because people move over, everyone gets friendly, and then everyone decides to move home at the same time, and then a new group comes in. So, you know, you see it from both sides, but there's such a brilliant community over there. And it's so, like, when I talk about my time playing football with Parnell's, like, we were literally like family. We lived in each other's pockets. And even though there was great rivalry between ourselves and Father Murphy's, like, I think in my house, I lived with Renee Murphy, another Parnell's footballer, but we lived with two Father Murphy's girls. And we actually played each other in the All Britain final that year, and it went to a replay. Like, that was one of our toughest matches in that campaign. But, you know, even though we were great rivals on the pitch, we were great friends off it. And even now, like, I was bridesmaid for Hannah back in March, and it's just, like football in London is brilliant, and 2012 will always stand out for me. And there's people over there who put so much into it. Like Tommy Donoghue is still managing Parnell's. I think I don't know, he's been there since the club probably was founded, I'd say. But like you need those people in the association to keep it going. And it was just brilliant to have a family away from home, and even to come home to play the matches was brilliant. And it's hard to believe it's 10 years ago now, but like we would have played Kilkerran and Clonberne in the All-Ireland semi-final.
Yes,
Went
I
to a
read that
replay.
actually. Yeah.
I remember like the scurry to find flights, the cheapest flights, and like you're paying it yourself, like, and you didn't care because of what was on the line. But like we would have been, we trained like a county team. Like I would have left work at 6:30 in the morning. It would have been 11:30 by the time I got home, and then I'd cook a dinner. Like it, and you just didn't think anything of it because everyone was so committed and so into the team. But we were lucky in terms of the players that we had, and the time of year it was, it was after the recession. A lot of people moved to London, and even the connections. Like I would have played football with Rona Sheridan, DCU, ended up playing with her over there, and even like the friendships you make from it. Like the Parnell's girls are still my best friends, even though the majority of them have moved home. So it's just a brilliant community to have when you're away.
That's incredible. And I know you've mentioned 2012, and I think Parnells were the first club team to win a Club All Ireland from outside of Ireland in 2012. Yeah. So I mean, and like you said, when you consider the cycle of players that go through it, it's incredible to hear Hannah Noonan's story. I only read her interview actually recently.
Yeah.
And thinking of it like that she's, and then maybe a few others are just engaging with a new set of Irish players every few years. And maybe that's why, I suppose you see Parnells come every now and again, and you see, I know London featured in Junior All Irelands intermittently throughout the 90s as well. And you mentioned how, getting up at 6:30 in the day, it seems like, well, like we talk about Dublin here and the commute and getting around, but like committing to a GA club in London must be quite difficult.
Yeah, and like people, London is a massive city. Like, the population is huge over there. But to even, so I was living in Twickenham, I was working in Notting Hill area. So that would take me the best part of an hour to get there. And then to get from like Notting Hill to Northwick Park where we trained, like that was essentially another hour to get there. And then the commute then from Northwick Park back to Twickenham was effectively another hour with a few pit stops to go to McDonald's or whatever on the way home. But we all did it together. So, there was a crew of us who all lived close to each other. So that's what made it easier. You always had somebody to chat to, or somebody to, there's always somebody along with you. And even the days we weren't training, we were going for dinner together. We were, you were calling to somebody's house for tea, and it was all football talk, like nonstop football talk. And, I think that's why our bond was so strong, because we effectively lived in each other's pockets.
And to think that, you mentioned about financing your own trips home, like I presume most of your matches were in Ireland. I know maybe a few of them might have been in London, but most of them you definitely had to travel home to Ireland for.
Yeah, well, I think we were lucky in that in terms of when it got to the provincial round, a provincial winner came and played us. We played St. Lawrence's from Kildare, and they came over to Islip, which is expensive for them. But then we flew home for the two semi-finals and the final then. So, and you are effectively, self-financing, and the club does the best they can to raise money, but that's on you to raise the money too. But you don't care at the end of the day with the reward you get.
And would you consider winning that Club All Ireland your playing highlight? And I know it isn't your home club, but at the end of the day, it's still, for that period of your life, it was your home club.
Yeah, exactly. And the hardest thing about winning that Club All Ireland was actually having to say goodbye to our families on that Sunday and fly back to London, because, we had to go to work. People that we worked with didn't realize that this is such a massive deal. A few of us had the Monday off, but like we had to be back and work on Tuesday. Whereas it is different though. Like I won a junior county final with my club in 2019, and we actually won the intermediate championship in Kildare last year, so 2021. So we've had a really successful last 3 years, and it's different. And I think when you're playing with your club at home, you've grown up with those people, you've coached those people, and that is very, very special. But of course, winning, nothing's going to top winning an All Ireland, and to win it with your best and closest friends and still have those friendships 10 years later, says it all, I think. Yeah.
And you're working as a primary teacher, as you mentioned, still doing the sports psychology at the same time, and involved with teams as well. And Is it something, I suppose, is it difficult to balance the two? Or you said they lend itself well to each other, but is it difficult, I suppose, to balance, I suppose, two aspects of a career, really?
It is, yeah. And I think like there's times of the year that will be busier than others. So it's really important to I always say to people, if I could take the advice that I give to you and actually apply it to myself, it'd be great.
We
But
all
it
do that.
does, yeah, but it does take a lot of organizing. So I've got a bit better at managing my time and learning to say no. Like no is a full sentence, and that's fine. I don't need to explain myself. You can just say no. But it, like I said before, they do lend, you know, they do lend it to each other, and they're the different skills that you apply. But sometimes it is hard, especially when you're still playing yourself. So like I play, I coach, and then I work and do my sports psychology on the side. So I'm literally never at home, and only for the fact that, you know, I call into my parents' house after school every day and get my dinner, like, and that keeps me going.
The best of us do that as well, Bernie.
I know, yeah. But it is hard to manage. But then, like, you have to challenge yourself as well. So, like in September, I'm taking on a new challenge. So I'm actually going working with the autistic children in my school in September. So I'm looking forward to that, and that will kind of lend itself as well. I'm going to have to, you know, say no to a lot more things just so I can work on that challenge to, you know, to improve myself and develop myself. Because sometimes I feel, you know, you spend so much time working with other people, you forget about yourself and actually, you know, looking after yourself too. And a lot of the work you do as a sports psychologist, you know, you're doing a lot of listening, and it's really, really important that you have, you know, somebody to go to just, you know, talk things through yourself, because it can be quite easy to fall into the trap of, you know, taking other people's kind of problems on board. And it's really important, you know, self-care for yourself is so important.
Absolutely. And like you said, I suppose sharpening the saw is always important as well, for everything you're doing. Bernie, thank you so much for your time this evening, as I know you're a busy lady. You're near the end of the school year though. School holidays are
Yeah.
on the horizon. You're getting there.
Yeah.
But thanks a million. And it's been incredibly interesting listening to your time with your clubs, your time in sports psychology, and wish you all the best in the coming year.
Great. Michelle, thanks very much.
Thanks so much.